relaxed.
Well,
Here we go.
Right. Okay. Welcome to the Autin Dance Theatre co-creation vlog series, where we will be discussing the importance and the reasoning behind making a co-creation work, exploring the processes around engaging community groups, sharing the journey of a current touring co-creation production. We will be speaking with co-creation participants, community group leaders, artistic directors of festivals and artists. All will share their successes and failures. In this episode, I'm joined with Autin Dance Theatre's artistic director, Johnny Autin, and our special guest today is Andrew Loretto, Hat Fair and Playmakers Director. My name is Adam Towndrow, creative producer, Autin Dance Theatre, and I will be your host. Thank you for joining us, Andrew, and thank you for joining us, Johnny.
you're welcome.
Yes, let's go.
So, Andrew, I've just got a couple of questions, and I know that you, part of this vlog is about the experience of Parade. It was quite a direct experience. But before I sort of delve into those sorts of questions, I would just love to know a little bit about what would be your first-hand experience of co-creation. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. It's really interesting. The terminology has changed over the years, but I've pretty much been involved with leading co-created projects with all generations and very diverse backgrounds all over the UK and Europe for almost 30 years now. And so it's kind of always been at the core of my practice. So as well as running a festival, at the moment I run Hat Fair here in Winchester, which is an international outdoor arts festival. But I've also been a practitioner all my career as well. So I've always worn both hats. And indeed, those two things very often link. So I often describe myself as an artist who makes a festival happen. And actually, my approach to running Hat Fair is one of co-creation. It's co-creation with space. It's co-creation with communities. It's co-creation with artists. It's co-creation with local businesses. It's co-creation with colleagues. It's co-creation with educational establishments, etc. And again, I kind of therefore also bring my dramaturg's hat because I work a lot as a dance dramaturg. So for me, there's a big element of dramaturgy thrown in the mix as well as co-creation. And I think actually one of the fundamental rules of a dramaturg actually is to be a co-creator, is to actually cede authority quite often, because you are letting in other people's thoughts, ideas, suggestions. So for me, it's kind of been at the core of my practice through projects such as setting up Sheffield People's Theatre back in 2010, which had hundreds of performers aged from about 12 to early 90s, creating large-scale projects, to working with young people in Cardiff. I've recently been creating an opera project with WNO, which has been very much co-created with young people. And although I've written the libretto recently, all of that is entirely based on 3 days of workshops we did with the young people. And they also have informed the composition as well. So our composers working with all the suggestions that the young people have given, and then it will go back to the young people to sort of create the final piece. So yes, co-creation can exist in so many shapes and forms. And for me, it's less lonely. Actually, collaborating as an artist, co-creating is more enjoyable, it's more enriching. You sort of simultaneously expose yourself as an artist or as a festival organizer because you have to cede control. You have to cede control, but then the brilliant thing is you realize how liberating that can be as well, in terms of genuinely challenging you and developing your own thoughts, your tastes, your opinions, and developing the work and making it richer. And you can taste and smell ownership. Equally, you can tell when that's not a thing. When someone says something is co-created and you go, it doesn't really feel co-created. So my antennae are very tuned into that. And the artists who really commit to co-authorship and those who kind of, well, do a little bit of participation on the side, but that's not the same as co-authorship.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I think there's a lot of sort of parachuting in and out, and so almost like a tick box exercise rather than with a real intent to want to make a difference or want to engage in a sort of deeper, sort of meaningful way with local people and local artists. And as a programmer, would you say what would define success to you, or working within a co-creation capacity? What would be like that was really successful? Why was it successful? How do you sort of put a value to that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think my priorities have tended to be, over the last 10 years, 10 to 15 years, I've tended to be working with communities that are maybe less engaged with the arts, might be isolated due to economic reasons, transport reasons, societal reasons, might be working with refugees and asylum seekers. A lot of the work we do is very connected into global politics and how that affects our daily lives and our work. And so for me, that carries quite a lot of challenge as well, and risk. And I often think that if a project doesn't have a certain amount of risk attached, is it actually worth doing? And therefore, some things work and some things don't. But the thing is to persist and to carry on and not give up at the first go. So for me, it's not about numbers. That's something I've learned over the years. It's definitely not about numbers when you're working with communities from the absolute grassroots up. And if you want to make it meaningful, it's about slow, sustained build and regular contact. And for me, if you have a really meaningful impact on a group of 5 people, okay, a really meaningful impact on a group of 5 people, that's worth more than a more sort of superficial thing with 20. So it's not about numbers, because the meaningful impact with a group of 5 people in that community, that will ripple and that will grow, and that will be 50 people in 5 years' time. That'll be 100 people in 6 or 7 years' time. So it's about the depth rather than the breadth of the impact. And my previous role prior to Hatfair, I was Director of Creative People and Places in Doncaster, and that was very much the approach. And big projects have come out of all of that, but you start small, you start in a really personal way. So for me, it's about relationship building. It's about the personal approach. I very much embed myself in the local community wherever I work. So I've been living here in Winchester for almost 8 years. And, prior to that, Sheffield or Doncaster or wherever it was I was based. And I choose to relocate and absolutely be part of the local community. So I don't think you can beat that personal touch, that personal connection. And likewise, I don't think you can beat the artists actually leading the work themselves, because they are the ones who really live it and breathe it and understand it and have that passion. So where it becomes a bit more challenging is if you don't have the time to do that long, slow build. And certainly some of our work this year was quite tight, but nonetheless, the people we have impacted have had a very strong experience, and we can absolutely build and grow from that. So, as I said, it's not about the numbers, it's about the depth of the impact. And people do come back to you and they tell you. And I think one measure of success, for example, this year, is I have had contact from several community participants, absolutely passionate, proposing ideas, wanting to get involved with more stuff, wanting to do more. So that's what I mean. It's about the depth of the impact, and then that will grow into other projects. Yeah.
Wow, that's lovely. And so if, for example, an artist is putting an idea or a concept together with co-creation, what kind of things are they, or what kind of things are you looking for to go, that sounds to me like a goer in terms of co-creation? What sort of aspects of a project would you be looking out for?
Each one's very bespoke. So that's quite a tricky question to answer, really. I get to know artists over the years. Adam, I've known you from my Doncaster days, I think, if not before, in fact, before, yes, I saw Trolleys when I was at the Sheffield Theatres. Johnny, obviously, I've known for 6 years or so now, by now, I would say 7 years. And for me, it's about developing relationships over a number of years with artists. Again, the slow build and the co-authorship, it applies. We're not just talking about community participants, we're talking about the professional artists as well. It's exactly the same principles. So that's how I work. And, getting to know how an artist likes to work, what their passions are. And for me, it's about artists who, of course, do brilliant work, as Autumn Dance does, but also it's having that generosity of spirit. Generosity, number one, open-mindedness, a spirit of genuine collaboration. And that means, as I say, sometimes there's adaptability there around the work. And for example, the work we did both at this year's Hat Fair and a couple of years ago with Echo, yes, you have a show that can absolutely tour as a show and can be its own thing. But actually, there's a wonderful chorousness to the work and how you structure the work. And because you have built that in from the word go, it's brilliant for people like us because, for me, one of the most exciting moments at Hat Fair this year was incorporating the wheel into the opening ceremony, which we had 2 hours to restage because of the pouring rain on the stage of Theatre Royal. It should have been in front of the cathedral. But actually, it was Autumn Dance. It was people like Zoologic Dance. There were other artists there, all of whom had that spirit of co-authorship in their bones and collaboration. Nobody was precious. Everybody knew the strength of their work, but equally everybody was mutually porous to let everything overlap and bleed. And so one of my personal special moments was seeing the wheel up on stage at Theatre Royal, and how brilliantly, and you'd had all of 15 minutes rehearsal, before the show, how brilliantly the dancers with Autumn Dance carefully helped the actors up onto the wheel and took their notebooks. They used all the brilliant skills that dancers have. And, Johnny was up on stage going bam, 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 bam. And, I'm always in awe of dancers, how quickly they can take on board instructions because that's their training. And just done beautifully and delicately and carefully, because actually asking in a heightened rehearsal situation, with hundreds of people in the room, hundreds, and everybody needs to do their little bit, getting actors who are quite nervous, to get up on a wheel and walk on a spinning wheel, takes a lot of trust and bravery and care. And the dancers were just absolutely brilliant with them. And so for me, that was a wonderful moment where you had the dancers, the actors on the wheel, you had the massed intergenerational choir, many of whom come from our local Ukrainian community. And then we had a group of learning disabled and non-disabled dancers led by Zoologic, all working together in a really special way. And for me, that was the prime moment of co-authorship at this year's festival, was to see all of that come together and how there was real listening and respect for each other, but not for 1 minute taking away from the individual artistic strengths as well, if that makes sense. And in fact, it heightened the individual artistic strengths by bringing it all together.
Thank you.
Those 3 actors felt so privileged to share the stage. That was really, really nice. They had an experience that was very memorable, and they were buzzing afterwards. But yeah, what a moment! What a moment! Thanks, Andrew. It was lovely to recollect that.
So, Johnny, when you were coming up with parades and you were thinking about perhaps engaging with programmers such as Andrew, what kind of things are you considering, and how early on did you think this is going to be a co-creation? And then how do you think that you would perhaps approach someone like Andrew?
Andrew mentioned Echo and maybe the choral aspect of going on a procession, going on a walkabout, and being followed by sometimes hundreds or thousands of people. That really what inspired Parade. I was like, if we can have a giant structure that tells a message, people will follow it and go on a walk with you. And therefore, I was already harnessing a power from people or the audience, the visual that the audience walking along. And that's where Parade kind of started. And then I was like, let's go a bit further. Let's really engage with communities a little bit more considerably, a bit more in depth, with a bit more time than just the moment of the show. And that's why I was like, let's have a community cast where we can dance together and move a handkerchief, clapping, a hello, having some co-creation moment. I've always knew that it was on a dial, that it's not always co-creation, co-authorship at all times, for health and safety reasons, but also because my own artistic intent is strong at times and others very porous. So I knew that this was a bit of a playing game. The show works without the community cast, but when there's a beautiful big community cast that has been nurtured, it's a different show. And it's got a more heart and it's beautiful and it feels us more connected to the place as well. So I guess I don't know. I don't remember how I came. I mean, Andrew was on board from the get-go, which was quite an easy win. But I think I would come to a programmer or a festival director, and I think now with the learning that what we've done this year, I would come differently. But I would say it's definitely what Andrew says. It's not about the numbers, because at first I sold it at this mass participation thing, this mass movement, because I remember the audiences from Echo, but actually the best community casts have been 15, 20 people, and they've been completely enough, far enough as a visual, is enough as an artistic vision. But it would always be people from different walks of life. That's definitely the different people that have different lived experiences, and then coming on a moment that has no speech, and to share the moment together of moving together. That's what I would say, and have a couple of repeated activities to make sure we hear their stories, we hear their voices, we hear their input, and making sure we give a truth to the input in the show. So in the show with the community cast, there are always 75% of the movements came from the participants on themes like community, support, listening, their individual identities. So it's really easy to go, this is Arthur's movement, and this is Sheila's idea, and this feels good. And like Andrew said, it's really rewarding because you're not in charge. Everybody else is in charge.
Yeah.
Why does that matter? Why don't you come up with the best moves possible, and it's a high quality movement led production, only having the best participants through an audition? Why can't you just do that?
Because one, they wouldn't do that. First of all, we're working with non-professionals, so they wouldn't do that, or they wouldn't do to the standard we're expecting, and it's not truthful to who they are. So I'd rather have a story from them. Like there's a story in Thurrock. We worked with a very diverse group earlier this month, and there was a Sheila. She was 74, and she started dancing on her own, holding people's handkerchiefs. Like she was literally dancing on her own. So we use her movement and just go, well, we borrowed her movement. So Sheila, we're going to call this movement the Sheila Circle. And it just has more gravitas, more soul. It's got more, and like Andrew said, you can smell when it's not co-created. You can feel it when people are forced to do something they've been told to, whether something that they've genuinely generated themselves and are proud to share. That's a different vibe.
I also think I'm just reminded of a phrase I was told years ago, ABC, art, business, craft. I don't know if anyone's heard this one before. You can learn the business, you can learn the craft, but the art is yours. The art is always yours. Everybody has art of some description in their soul, in their heart. So I think it's about honoring that. It's about honoring the art. I think where then the co-authorship and the collaboration comes in is the craft. So someone like Johnny or an experienced artist can be working with, if it is a community participant, someone can be working with a community participant and bring the craft element to kind of elevate and transform the art of the co-author into the piece. And I think there's a real delight in that journey. And again, I've also seen, there's constant debate around, this is one of the number one things I hear that people are scared of, actually, in terms of letting go and ceding authority. This is true of the theatre performing arts industry as a whole. Less so now than when I started, I have to say, because I think co-authored work and engagement work has become more mainstream, actually, maybe because there are more people like myself actually, running the joint, so we bring that philosophy with us, and that's our stock and trade. But actually, It is one of the things I've heard all the time. Oh, if you cede that control, if you let people in, the what's going to happen to the quality, and I think this is, you can absolutely achieve really high quality with co-authored work. You really, really can, and it's about honouring the co-authored elements and contribution in a way that works for the form, and that's where the lead artists can make that happen if they're really aware, really sensitive to those elements, so that those people at whatever craft ability or skill level they have, they will look fantastic. They will look like a superstar. Do you know what I mean? That's our job, actually, is to make them feel really super comfortable and be wonderful as part of the project. And again, coming back to honouring the integrity of that contribution, I think Johnny also raises an interesting point. That there is, truthfully, in terms of all co-author work, there's a sliding scale of degree of co-authorship, and that's fine, because with something like the Weird Parade, there may be, in some scenarios, just one tiny element that's co-authored, and in other scenarios might be quite a major element. But one of the things I was also struck by with Parade at Hat Fair this year, so okay, we did the wonderful opening ceremony, but seeing the show happen in the cathedral grounds in the 3 stages, and seeing the audience grow and grow and grow as they follow the show. Just the simple act, and I thought this was absolutely beautiful, the simple act of passing a rope on either side of the wheel, that's co-authorship. That is an element of co-authorship, because the audience are becoming part of the performance. And Johnny, what Johnny does with both Parade and Echo, actually, is not afraid to sort of give instructions, but does it in a performative way. So actually, it's almost like live rehearsal performance, and the audience, you know what I mean, are almost sucked into it, and then are loving it and are very much part of it. So you've got the people you've rehearsed with as part of it, but then you're kind of rehearsing people into the show live on the spot, essentially. And I absolutely loved that. So, and Fidget Feet did that as well this year, a very porous show with elements of chaos around the edges, but that's great. Loved all of that. And there were people absolutely ended up kind of being in the show, and we had a case of one dancer who was there at the matinee, sort of ended up being part of the end, and then he was fully part of the show that evening. Wonderful.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
I remember that moment with the rope. I think it was due to the sheer number of audiences. We had to direct a wider corridor. It was great. And there's also that bit with the handkerchief dance where by the second show, wherever we're going, audiences who have the handkerchief end up copying the dance that the community cast is doing. A few seconds late, probably a little bit off, but it's still beautiful because it adds to the visual. So I really love that. Going back to Andrew's point around artistic quality of participatory work, I think where people get it wrong when they just go, it's poor quality because it's not made by professionals that are trained or whatever. I think they miss the point around the value of seeing it. They understand that they go, quality is my taste and this is not my taste because I'd like to see such and such. But there's a value. There's a value for people that are not performers, for local people to be showing what they can do as part of their practice, whatever that may be. There's huge value, especially when there are quite a few of them in front of an international audience. Like this is incredible. There's an actual value to it and a beauty to it that should not be dismissed by the naysayers. That was my point.
Yeah, I mean, people, because what I love about what I found in this journey of this co-creation with this project was how passionate people are about it. And I think like there are shows that I'm in it, or I'm not into it, whatever. But actually, when you start talking about co-creation, there's such a not even a polarized view. It's just it's complex, but it's something that people are very inspired to be part of, as long as it's done in the right way, in a more sensitive way. Some groups require a bit more hand holding, But ultimately, there's that sense of liveness about it. You're working with non-professionals, perhaps, in that sort of setting, and there's lots of unpredictable moments, which is always interesting to see what happens next. Just moving away from fantastic successes, I'm curious to explore briefly, I suppose, Andrew, about things. What are the challenges, perhaps, that you might find with co-creation, or when things haven't gone well? I know they're all sort of learning experiences, but what are the sort of like the minefields can we be wary of, perhaps, if someone's making something to be,
Yeah, I think it's landing like a UFO and disappearing again. That's something to be wary of. Is always from the outset is to think about the long game, because the realities might be, I mean, so from a Hat Fair point of view, my job title is Hat Fair and Playmakers Director, and it's that job title for a reason, because here at the charity Play to the Crowd, we are three elements: Theatre Royal Winchester, Hat Fair, our festival, and Playmakers, which is our year-round work with local communities, artists, and sort of art form development. And so actually the work we do during the 3 days, the 2 or 3 days of Hat Fair, is part of that continuum throughout the year. That's really important. It's a bit like a two-way spring, the work springs into Hat Fair and it springs back out and feeds into the work we do during the year. So bringing a company like Autumn Dance in to work for a period of time, and in this case it is a moment in time, with some local communities, for me, that's not an isolated journey. That is part of a bigger journey through the year. So for me, where things can drop and where things can fail is where you are unable for any reason to continue that journey because you're setting up expectations, and where is that journey going to take people next? And that's really, really important to give thought to that. Projects in themselves can absolutely exist as one-offs. I mean, I've directed so many one-off projects over the years. They have been bespoke, but they have been part of a bigger journey. And for example, whenever I'm engaged as a freelance artist, I've been working with Welsh National Opera recently on a couple of projects, and for me, I really want to get to know the context of the organization and who they're working with and where they're at in those relationships with those young people, those musicians, etc., whoever they might be. And therefore, I want to feed in and help that journey and hand on the next lap of the journey. It's a bit like a relay race from that point of view. I'm handing on the baton, and from the point where I started the project to the point where I finished my engagement as a freelancer with that project, that baton will be in a slightly different position to help that organization, to help those relationships. So that's where I come from. So yeah, where the danger can be is if for some reason you're not able to sustain that and things can just drop very quickly and you're kind of back to square one. And sadly, sometimes the resources might not be there to sustain that journey. That's just a practical thing. So for me in the past, that's where I've very much tried to avoid that in any shape or form, even if it's a small way of sustaining that relationship, sustaining that work. But, for example, we, as part of my remit, we do quite a lot of local artist development during the year. And we've had various projects with writers. So our opening ceremony this year, because we had a bit of resource from Shared Prosperity Fund, we were able to make a resource available for local writers. So our 3 performers are also writers as well, the ones who joined Johnny. And so it's part of their development as local artists. It's part of me trying to feed in and help develop a local arts infrastructure, etc., etc. But I'm not funded, or Play to the Crowd's not funded to do writing development all year round. And so we're very reliant on little bits that we get with different projects. But what I try to do is knit together lots of different little bits to have a bit of continuity. But I'm aware that there's more I would like to do to kind of sustain that work. And we just have to prioritize our choices and which communities we work with. So that's what we're trying to do here, is just make careful choices so that we're not trying to work with everybody. We're not setting up false hope, so that at least the relationships we are building with our communities, with our artists, we can reasonably feasibly, even in a challenging funding climate, try and sustain. And then in and out of that continuity comes, you know, visiting artists, partner artists such as Alton Dance, such as Fidget Feet, or whoever it might be. So yeah, that's where things can drop, is where you're not able to sustain the relationship.
If I may add something, Adam, I think the counterpart of what Andrew is talking with his organizations and ours is to be specific about who you engage with. I think it's that thing where if we're too wide, too open, too for everybody, but we're never just for everybody, and that's where it can flop a bit. So my learning from this year with Parade, if that's okay to share in that space, is to really work with each of the partners on which specific communities they would like us to target and work with. Because we've gone all walks of life, which can be anyone and everyone. But actually, with the project's been really successful when we work with young people with disabilities, queer communities, or people with specific needs, and just this community, just this group, and that's when the success really works. When it's a little bit of a everyone and no one, it waters down the care or the what we need to do to really cater for their experience, not just their needs, their experience.
I think the other thing, and I alluded to this earlier, like we had our 50th birthday at Hat Fair this year, and so we really went to town with the level of co-authored work and participatory projects. Like, I mean, it was massive this year. I've kind of made a rod for my own back because everybody loved the opening event so much, and I want one every year, but which is great actually. But so we are going to try and find a way of, and every year it'll be specific and bespoke.
That would be so good.
Yeah,
that would be so good, and then
so
you can pick up some of the acts that are willing to jug up. That would be
exactly
amazing,
and it'll be different every year by its very nature. So that's a lovely outcome. But one of the things that was challenging about this year was because the very nature of the communities we're targeting are less engaged, etc., was the relative lack of time, to get people on board. And I'm really happy overall with where we got to. But, what I want to try and build in is more time for those relationships to happen. So we're actually moving to a sort of new model with Hat Fair, starting from 2025 onwards, which will kind of work on a 2-year cycle. So we will, instead of having 3 or 4 months to kind of try and do stuff, we'll actually hopefully have a year, maybe a year and a half, to be building those relationships, because I'm hoping that will allow, and this is all subject to us getting the resources, I hasten to add, so hashtag subject to funding. But I'm hoping that sort of longer lead up time period will enable the key artists from the companies to actually be on the ground a little bit more, because as I said, you can't beat that. And so, hopefully that will be able to fit in a little bit more with their kind of touring, making schedules, etc. But also will work with us because we're doing the longer, slower build, deepening those relations. So that's kind of our next step. And some of our projects this year we did really well in terms of, again, numbers, if you want to talk about numbers, some less so. But again, I come back to, it's not about numbers. Those people had a great experience, and that's a great jumping off point for hopefully our kind of new model, working on the 2-year cycle, where we'll kind of have more sustained co-authored relationships, which will feed into things like the opening ceremony and the core of the festival.
That's amazing. Well, I can't wait to see that. Johnny, you alluded to something I was going to ask you, and you kind of started that. So thank you for starting that. I wonder if you could go in a little bit more into that, in terms of if you were, when you're speaking to a festival, for example, and your experience of this year and obviously last year as well, what kind of things are, other than targeted groups, is there anything else that you go, oh, that's a bit of a red flag? Is there anything else that you want from a festival or organization that wants to support co-creation work, that you could maybe support them and go, actually, have you thought about this? Or what things worry you, or what things went
Yeah,
well or
I mean,
badly?
this action research that we're currently delivering taught us quite a lot, and now I've got a bit of a table, a bit of an analytical table. Are you a venue with a space? Because that helps. Have you got already groups that are coming to your space?
Aha.
Sometimes that helps. And if you're not a venue with a space, have you done these kind of things before? Do you understand how much time it's going to take to put things in place? And then you can get a vibe really quickly. How many groups are you already engaging with? And if you don't have a space, or if you don't have group, what are your tenuous relationship with the group leaders or the participants in your locality? And that's the big tell. Because if it's if it's a little bit like, kind of like nonchalant, just going, yeah, of course we engage with our local communities. But if we don't see hard contact that we can just go, hi, Catherine, your group that you're meeting on Friday night, can we come and talk to them in a bit? Like, you know what I mean? Like those kind of one-on-one, really personal relation with the ground. That's a little bit difficult. But that said, some people, some of our partners, sometimes they had no community groups, and they found one community group that wanted to work with us for 2 months, for 8 weeks. That example is in Whitehaven. One adult with learning disabilities that wanted to work with us for 8 weeks, repeated engagement, half a day with the same guardian, and it was just a wonderful experience this weekend. So the big lesson this year is it will take a lot more time to plan, a lot more time to develop relationship and to understand what is needed in each locality than we could ever imagine. It's a year-long project. So when Andrew says repeated engagement and then side posting and then trying to have a simultaneous link that keeps on building to create this beautiful tapestry, that's definitely where it's at. But if we're not from the locality, we can't be the one that keeps doing this. It has to be the partners have to join forces.
Has anyone come up to you, for example, who haven't done co-creation before and said, can we work? Because what I think that the outcome of this whole project is that there would be a festival organization that is keen to get involved in and would spend a lot longer time. Can we work together on putting on the show? I'm going to need some support and guidance around that. I think that might be an interesting.
I think that would be this action research could be the added value to some of those festival organizers. Absolutely, we've done it. We failed in so many places. We've also won in others. Work with us once, and then we can avoid all the trips and falls of the process, and just go, this is what it needs to look like. In that area, or in that, I'm hoping we're gonna have a few next year, obviously, that are learning from our experience, because there's been quite a bit of investment around this learning thing, or they can just look through our evaluation report and just go, they did this, I hadn't thought about that, and that's the outcome. Interesting. It would be nice. Yeah. It's much harder. It's much harder.
Yeah.
I feel like I think people who haven't done it yet in 2024 is because they are of the type of people that go, it's not good art if it's not made by pure artists. You know what I mean? I think everybody has had their fingers in participatory, community, co-creation, co-authorship, whatever you call it, some kind of like they've seen the value of it and they've taken part in it themselves, or they've facilitated for it to happen. So I think if you haven't done it yet, it's because you're not into it.
Yeah, maybe.
I think there can be a fear around capacity as well, and again, maybe that fear of letting go of a certain amount of control. I think that can sometimes be a block to work happening as well.
Because I know that obviously you're working with that Finnish organization, Andrew, aren't you? That festival, and it's interesting the fact that they've leaned over to you for support, and I just wonder whether there is ever have been a time where it's an organization leaning over to an artist with faith in them to be able to put something together. So that's something to think about. Last question, I promise. is where is the future of co-creation, Andrew, do you think? And for Johnny as well to have a little think about, where do you think it's going? What sort of things should we consider when making a new one? Where do you think the future lies with that?
I think in terms of the ethos and the spirit and intent of co-creation, I think if we just talk about the outdoor arts world and the festival sector, if I just focus in on that, I think the next step is more collaboration between festivals. So actually just following on from the example you've just said, you know, with the new Hop Fest in Finland and ourselves, and as part of developing this model with Hat Fair, there's various other trusted relationships with other festivals that I'm looking to how festivals can co-create and then with artists as part of the mix. And so again, hashtag subject to funding. This is part of the new sort of 2-year cycle with Hat Fair that I hope we're going to really develop from all the work we've been doing over the last sort of 7-8 years during my time, is which obviously then has built on the work that's gone before that as well. But it's actually how do we enable co-authorship between organizations and festivals that involves the artists at the core as well. And this is also tied into discussions at the moment that are very current in the industry, thinking around environmental sustainability and touring, and actually if we are, you know, how do we do things in a little bit of a more joined up way? So for me, the co-authorship with other festivals, like, I mean, the festivals that I am already have that relationship with or are developing the relationship with, they're all festivals that are very engaged with their communities, that absolutely buy into this ethos, that are very generous. All the things I talked about earlier, very generous of spirit. They're not in capital cities. So they're in smaller places like us in Winchester. So therefore we kind of have that not only desire, but need. You know, the fact is, you know, why co-authorship? I would also turn that around and say, you know, if you don't do it, well, should you exist? You know, at the end of the day, we are working in the public space. We're working with people and lives and reality and often public money as well. And, you know, I think, you know, we are, particularly outdoor arts, actually, particularly outdoor arts, I think we're as vital a part of society as the health service, as you know, education, as sport, as, you know, transport, you know, public transport. And therefore, you know, we have a responsibility to co-author and to keep the work porous and to be, you know, making stuff happen. You know, if you think about it, sport, you don't get this argument. You think about the number of people who participate in sport who are non-professional, but they work with professional coaches. They work with, you know, that's a form of co-authorship in a way, okay? In that, you know, happening with hundreds, thousands of people across the country, and it's just accepted. So, and people do develop their skills and develop the quality as well over a period of time. And I think absolutely the same can happen with co-authored artistic work. So for me, it's about collaboration, more collaboration as we move forward. And that might be national and or international.
You know where my brain went? Thanks, Andrew. That's super interesting. My brain went, sometimes co-creation or participatory art activities reach local communities too late in the process. It's like, join this. Great, fantastic. Join this. Or this is on offer. Or, and this is beautiful. And then come and see this show and then take part in this and be part of this community cast. And that's fantastic. But I have a feeling it's a little bit too late in the process. We need buy-in at decision-making level. I would love for the future in my utopian world, I would love to have, you know, what we all want to have is volunteers, community steering group that just puts the leadership people, like myself, like Andrew, in check and just go, have you thought about this? Because we make work for people, and the people should also have a bit of a say on what's being programmed, how it's being programmed, how they're being involved, or how they're being asked to be involved. Like, yeah, steering. We've got some young people steering group whenever there's work for children and young people. It would be nice to have some local community steering the pot and what's being presented at such festival, or how they're going to be asked. And because I think that there would be, then we could go into collaboration, and I would love for Parade. We haven't had that yet. We have spoken one at Dance, but I would have loved for Parade, a community group somewhere on tour this summer, to go, we're a choir. We don't do movement. We're a choir. Can we sing something? Can we sing something alongside the wheel? And I would have just gone, yes. That would have been great. But it needs to come from them. So yeah, just how we engage with local. Well, I'm going to say with non-professionals, local people that seeing events on their streets. Yeah, I want to see more of that. That's my future.
And that's interesting, because actually that was very much the approach when I was running Creative People and Places. Absolutely, you know, they informed all the choices, all the commissions, and not me. And obviously I steered, I empowered, I facilitated, but absolutely they made the choices. And trying to do a similar development here with Hat Fair. So all of those different communities we're working with, we're building a network of community associates who absolutely will be informing our content, our programming, and I think that's really vital. And again, it is about that seeding control, but in my experience, it's a very empowering thing, because there can be a fear in some quarters. Oh my goodness, if I give away elements of programming, what's going to happen? And actually, wonderful things usually happen, because it's not about. It's not about, oh, just do anything you want. Okay, it is absolutely about a proper grown-up two-way conversation where you learn about each other, and you learn about the work, and I learn about the communities. We get to understand each other. It's a relationship, and out of that comes a respect. And my experience of doing exactly the sort of thing you've just said, Johnny, is that people take the responsibility incredibly seriously and very thoughtfully as well, and it can be a very, very rich relationship. Like, I mean, I'm, for example, you know, I'm really delighted that, for example, 10 years ago, someone who, and I won't name any names, but someone who, you know, started as a community associate with Right Up Our Street is now well, one of our main artists at Hat Fair. Do you know what I mean? And it's those journeys are fantastic. I go back to the ABC. The art was always there. It's the other elements that we can sort of bring in, the business and the craft, and the opportunity and the platform for that work to thrive and grow. And yeah.
Well, what a lovely to end on. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew, and I wish you the very best of luck with all of the funding, and I do hope it all, and I'm sure it will all come good in the end. And thanks very much for your time, Johnny, as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Thank you both.